Lala M wants to know, how much of a threat are Russia and China in the Panama Canal? You guys are coming with the easy questions first thing in the morning. Okay, let's talk about it. So let's talk about Russia first. So after Russia invaded the Ukraine, sanctions were imposed on Russia by a lot of the world, and one of the countries that imposed sanctions on Russia was Panama. So Panama has imposed sanctions on Russia because of the Ukraine war. So that's sort of where their diplomatic relations stand. They have Russian ships that pass through the canal, but very, 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 very few. Russia does not use the Panama Canal that much. Just to give you an idea, about 3.5% of the world's ships pass through the Panama Canal, and that is mostly the United States and China. So Russia doesn't use the Panama Canal that much, and I would say that in general, superpowers are the biggest threat within their sphere of influence. And the Russian sphere of influence, for the most part, is its former Soviet territories. So its sphere of influence is Eastern Europe for the most part. So that's really where Russia is a physical threat. Could they threaten the Panama Canal? They could certainly try, but it's outside of their sphere of influence, so it would be a bit of a reach for them to do that. Logistically and certainly diplomatically, it would be seen as an enormous overstep for Russia. So I don't see Russia as being a threat to the Panama Canal particularly. I think that they're a threat in general. But it should be mentioned that the war in Ukraine has had a negative impact on the economy of Panama because it has caused an overall rise in fuel and food prices around the world, and Panama primarily imports its fuel and its food. So it has had a negative impact on the people of Panama because it's meant that the inflation pressures on that country are high. Okay, now let's talk about China. So when I think about China, I am reminded of my history professor in Spain in the 1990s and the way she described the Moorish invasion of Spain in 700. The way she described it was the Moors came to Spain, they took some of the territory by force, but the rest of the territory they took pactar, she would say. Pactar, meaning they made deals, they made treaties, they traded. So I think of China that way. China's interests around the world are governed first and foremost by economics, by this idea of trade partnership. They are a threat militarily within their sphere of influence, which for the most part is Asia. Obviously, they've already taken over some territory like Tibet that wasn't theirs historically. They have made very real threats to Taiwan. But for the most part, China's form of diplomacy is economic diplomacy. And they've been extremely, extremely successful at this. And I think the most notable example is the way that they have made deals in the continent of Africa in ways that the rest of Europe, the United States, Canada, North America, like, they don't see Africa as an equal partner the way that China did. And China came in and made deals to build infrastructure and invest in business and to buy land in Africa because they saw it as having great economic potential in a way that the rest of the world didn't. So China is very, very, very smart, and they're very economically focused. They're very good. They're very, very good. And I think for me, what's scary about China is that they are incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, and they have an eye towards the long game and immense impulse control. So they are a force to be reckoned with for sure. Now let's talk about the Panama Canal. Most of the shipping that goes through the Panama Canal is from the United States. 75% of the shipping that goes through the Panama Canal is from the United States. So it is mostly us. But a large portion of the rest of that shipping comes from China, because China does a ton of trade around the world. They rely on shipping lanes being free. So China absolutely has an interest in the Panama Canal, but nobody has more of an interest in the Panama Canal than we do. So who's a threat to the Panama Canal? The United States is. Really, they're the only one. China does have an interest, though, and they did start negotiations towards a free trade agreement with Panama in 2018. But that agreement has not gone through, and those talks stalled out during the pandemic. And they've only recently restarted those negotiations. In 2022, they started talking with China again, but they have not put a free trade agreement in place. So I would say that China would love to have some influence in the Panama Canal, and if that free trade agreement goes through, that's something to look at. But I think a lot of the countries in Central and South America are cautious in engaging with superpowers besides the United States, because they know that it could cause tensions with the United States. And Central and South America is the U.S. sphere of influence. So for better or for worse, the sphere of influence of the United States is very much in North, Central, and South America. Now, the United States has made the world its sphere of influence in various ways over the years, but I would say its primary sphere of influence is here in North, Central, and South America. So I would say that Russia is not really a threat to the Panama Canal. I would say that China is a little bit of a threat to the Panama Canal, but the main threat to the Panama Canal is the United States.